On overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Common sense, what a concept. To discuss that concept, Leith Van Onselen. Leith is Chief Economist at the MB Fund and MB Super and co-founder of Macro Business. Hello, Leith. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Mike. How about yourself?
Until I saw this headline, I wasn't too bad, but then I discovered that Australia's suffered the world's biggest decline in living standards. How did we manage that?
Yeah, it's a bit of a shocker, actually. So Michael Reid at the AFR has done an analysis basically comparing Australia's real per capita household disposable income. So that's basically your incomes after adjusting for inflation, population growth, taxes, and mortgage payments. That's basically what it measures. And Australia's real per capita household disposable income in the year to September, which is the most recent data we have from the national accounts, fell by 6.1%. Now, it turns out that is by far the biggest fall in the world, according to OECD data. And basically, Australia's real per capita household disposable income fell by more than 7.8% more than what the OECD average did. So the OECD average went up by 1.7% and ours went down by 6.1%. And that basically just tells you that, we've had a world record living standards collapse in Australia, which is not that surprising, really, when you think about the high cost of living we've had, the high tax burden, obviously also the super high increase in mortgage rates, which has actually been higher here than just about anywhere else in the world because we have a very high share of variable rate mortgages which get adjusted straight away. So, yeah, it's been an absolute shocker and it's not really an award you want to get, but unfortunately we've got one. And just one last thing, Mike, Australia's real per capita household disposable income is now tracking at about 2012 levels. So we've effectively gone backwards 12 years. And a prominent economist, Chris Richardson, projects that by 2026, so a couple of years from now, we're only going to have recovered back to about 2015 levels. So we're basically facing a lost decade where we're basically living standards are going to decline. And by the end of this decade, I wouldn't be surprised if everyone's worse off than they were then at the start of the decade.
The more it goes on, the more I get in touch with my inner Donald Horne. It actually surprises me there are still people who say we're not the lucky country anymore. But of course, Mr. Horne's point was we've got everything going for us, but we are led by second-rate incompetence. And seems like we continue to do that.
Yeah, look, Australia shoots itself in the foot so many times. It's ridiculous. We've obviously got a abundance of riches, etc., and we don't manage to capture the benefit from those riches properly for our own citizens, unlike places like Norway. We've also somehow created an energy crisis in Australia. We're one of the world's biggest energy exporters, and yet on the east coast at least, we're paying world prices for all our for our gas, which is basically pushing up our electricity prices. So we've robbed ourselves of cheap energy. And then obviously we're running a mass migration scheme that's driving rents through the roof and forcing people to live in group housing and or become homeless and also creating inflation. So yeah, pretty much we run a stupid model down here, and unfortunately our politicians don't bother looking after us. They're too busy looking after their mates.
What about this? The Greens housing spokesman, Max Chandler-Mather, they want, the Greens collectively, more immigration, and he says that claimed record immigration is having minimal impact on the housing market. Is Mr. Chandler-Mather from here, or did he just recently arrive from some planet 100 light years away?
Yeah, look, this guy's an absolute crackpot. So he's basically the Greens housing spokesman, and he went on Sunday's ABC Insiders program, and he was basically, asked point blank. He said, because Chandler-Mather was complaining about the housing market being unaffordable and everything, which I get his concerns. He's not wrong, and he did actually have some reasonable solutions. Some okay ideas along with a lot of stupid ones. But he was specifically asked by David Spears, who's the host, what about immigration? And he flat out said that immigration's a distraction. It has minimal impact on the housing market, which is just absolutely absurd. Australia's had nearly 520,000 net overseas migration. It's the reason why our rental vacancy rates are collapsed to a record low. It's the primary reason why rents are going through the roof. And it's primary reason why we're seeing more homeless people and more people being forced to live in group housing. And to make matters worse, David Spears flat out asked him, he said, would the Greens like more immigration or less? And then after mumbling and trying to avoid the question, he finally said that, quote, more people coming to this country is a good thing. So basically, the Greens want even more immigration. Now, this is a party that's supposed to care about not just housing affordability, but also the natural environment. Now, I can think of a few things that are worse for Australia's natural environment than growing the population like a science experiment. Because every one of those people is going to use more resources. It's going to chew up the countryside. It is literally one of the worst things you can do. We've got to somehow find the water supply for these extra people, which is going to mean battery desalination plants everywhere, which are energy guzzling. And at the same time, this Chandler Mather guy and the Greens always bang on about how we need to have net zero emissions. Well, how are you going to have net zero emissions when your population is going to grow like a science experiment and you want more of it? It is absolutely absurd. This is supposed to be a Greens party. In the 1990s, they were heavily for a stable population. They pushed for population stabilisation, whereas now they're absolute open borders nutters, lunatics, who want to basically let anyone into this country who wants to come here and wants to totally bulldoze the country into high-rise apartments. That's basically his solution, because that's what would need to be done if we have an open borders immigration policy, which is kind of what they seem to espouse, because he said, quote, more people coming into this country is a good thing.
Well, I saw a quote the other day from Nick McKim, something along the lines of, it would be un-Australian of us not to let the asylum seekers in. It's like anybody can come here, it seems, and the more the merrier, according to the Greens. Do you want to take a guess, or do you know what's the motivation here? I mean, it might be suggested by some people that if it were another political party, they just want the numbers to vote for them, and that's their plan. But is there any plan at all?
Look, it's hard to say. I'm not really sure why the Greens are like this, because they're supposed to be an environmental party.
Yeah.
And, first and foremost, that's in their name. The crazy thing about this is, Max Chandler Mather, one of his key solutions to the housing crisis was building more public housing. Well, guess what? You're never going to build enough to keep up with population growth, because the Greens simultaneously want to massively increase the humanitarian intake. Where do you think those humanitarian intake people are going to live? They're going to live in public housing. So his solution is to build more public housing, but at the same time as we're growing the population at a record pace, and he wants more, which is just crazy. And the federal government State of the Environment report, this is like the intergenerational report of the environment. The most recent one came out in 2021, and every time that report comes out, they say that population growth has a very high impact on the environment and is one of the key drivers of environmental degradation. So don't you think if you're a Green Party, you might want to maybe stabilise the population rather than, double it over, say, 50 years, which is what the Greens seem to want to do?
Seems like a lot of random thoughts running around and totally disconnected. Is there some good news here, Leith, in the fourth quarter wage price index?
Yeah, look, that was actually decent. So basically, we've had a run of ABS data, so data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics that's basically disappointed and coming worse than expected. So whether that's retail sales, labour market, the unemployment rate, etc., that's all been a lot worse than expected. On Wednesday, the Australian Bureau of Statistics released its fourth quarter wage price index, which actually met expectations. So wages grew by 0.9% over the quarter to be up 4.2% year on year. So that was basically what economists expected, and it was, a fraction, marginally ahead of what the RBA's projection was, but it won't move the needle there. So what this basically means is after a period of, wages falling quite sharply, we've actually had, guess what, 0.1% year-on-year real wage growth, which is not anything that's, it's not a flex, but at least it's some growth. I will add, though, that that's only against, headline inflation. The cost of living for working households has gone up 6.9% in the last year, so it's still not up to that.
Yeah.
Even despite this, given the RBA's projections for the economy, real wages will still be 3.5% below their pre-COVID level by 2026. So it's a long, slow grind back to where we were pre-COVID, because real wages are tracking at about 2012 levels still, but at least they've turned the corner and it's not getting worse.
Leith, appreciate your time and insights as always. Thanks for that.
Yeah, cheers, Mike.
Leith Van Onselen, and Leith is the Chief Economist at the MB Fund and MB Super and co-founder of Macro Business.